My grandmother kept a small glass jar on the kitchen windowsill for 47 years. Not a fancy jar, not a decorative one. Just a plain, thick-walled jar she had saved from a batch of cold cream she bought in 1938. When she died in 1985, we found 14 of those jars still stacked in her pantry, each holding something different. Buttons, rubber bands, bacon grease, seeds, coins. She never once threw a jar away. Not because she was sentimental, because she had lived through the Depression, and she knew, bone deep, that the day you threw away a perfectly good jar was the day you needed one and didn't have it. That lesson stayed with her until her last breath. And it lives in those jars still. We live in a world now where products come and go in months, where companies design things to break, to be replaced, to be forgotten. But there was a time in America, roughly between 1929 and 1945, when every single product in your home had to earn its place. When people chose what they bought with the kind of careful deliberation we now reserve for major purchases. When quality was not a marketing word, but a survival calculation. Today, we're going back to that time. We're going to look at 25 everyday products that the Depression generation relied on. Products that were in almost every American home during those years. Products that solved real problems with real elegance, and products that have since quietly vanished from our lives. Some of them were replaced by something better. Some were replaced by something merely cheaper. And some, honestly, were replaced by nothing at all, leaving a gap we never even noticed was there. If you're new here and you care about American history, practical living, and the wisdom that gets buried when generations pass, hit subscribe before we start. Because after number 4 on this list, you're going to want to be here for everything else we cover. Number 25 is the one that surprises almost everyone who hears about it. And we're starting right now. Number 25, the roller towel. Walk into any American home, any diner, any general store in 1934, and you'd find it. A long, continuous loop of cotton toweling mounted on a wooden rod beside the sink. You'd pull the clean section down, dry your hands, and let the used section feed back into the roll. The towel was removed weekly, washed, and rehung. It sounds simple because it was. But the engineering behind a well-made roller towel was genuinely impressive. The cotton was thick and tightly woven, with a texture that dried hands efficiently without requiring paper. A single roller towel could serve a family of 6 for a full week between washings. Hotels used industrial versions. Schools had them. Barbershops swore by them. The Depression killed paper towel sales for most of the decade because nobody could afford to throw anything away, and the roller towel was the answer to that problem. It disappeared slowly after World War II, as paper products became cheap again and indoor plumbing became more universal. By 1960, it was a relic. Today, you cannot buy one at a hardware store. You cannot order one from a major retailer. There are a handful of antique dealers who stock them, and there are a handful of very old men and women who will tell you, without any hesitation, that it was simply a better system. Number 24. Bluing. Ask anyone under 50 what bluing is and you will get a blank look. Ask anyone over 75 and their face will light up with recognition. Bluing was a liquid, usually a deep cobalt color, that housewives added to the rinse water when washing white laundry. It worked on a principle of optical illusion. White fabric, as it ages, takes on a faint yellowish tinge. Bluing, a blue-tinted rinse, counteracted that yellow, making the white appear brighter and whiter than it actually was. It cost almost nothing. A bottle the size of your thumb could last a family a full month. Mrs. Stewart's Bluing, founded in 1883, is actually still produced today, which makes it one of the remarkable survivors on this list, though almost nobody knows it exists. But in the Depression era, bluing was as standard a laundry product as soap itself. Every hardware store, every five and dime, every general store stocked it in quantity. The disappearance of bluing from mainstream consciousness tracks almost perfectly with the rise of detergents with optical brighteners built in. The industry essentially absorbed the function and erased the product. Number 23. Stove black. Before the age of porcelain-coated appliances, before the era of stainless steel, the kitchen stove was a cast-iron object that required regular maintenance to stay presentable. Stove black, sometimes called stove polish, was a waxy black compound that you rubbed into the iron surface to restore its dark finish and protect it from rust. The application process was almost meditative. You'd apply the compound with a stiff brush, work it into every crevice, let it dry slightly, then buff it with a second brush until the stove shone with a deep matte blackness that looked almost like new. It smelled of graphite and mineral oil. Women who grew up in the Depression remember the smell of stove black the way others remember the smell of baking bread. It was a Saturday morning smell, a chore smell, a smell that meant the household was being cared for properly. The product vanished in the 1950s and 1960s as gas and electric ranges with enamel finishes replaced the old cast iron wood burners. You cannot maintain something that doesn't exist anymore. Number 22. Tatting shuttles. This one is a little different because the object itself hasn't entirely vanished, but the practice it enabled has come within one generation of extinction. Tatting is a form of lace making done with a small, flat, boat-shaped tool called a shuttle, wound with fine thread. During the Depression, tatting was not a hobby in the modern sense. It was a domestic skill on par with canning or preserving. A woman who could tat could produce her own lace collars, cuffs, doilies, and handkerchief edges, replacing store-bought trim with handmade work that was arguably more beautiful and cost almost nothing but time. Time, during the Depression, was the one resource poor families had in abundance. 5 and dime stores sold tatting shuttles for a few cents. Thread was cheap. The skill itself was taught by mothers to daughters as a matter of course. Today, there are fewer than 100,000 people in the United States who know how to tat, by most estimates. The shuttles are still manufactured in small quantities for craft enthusiasts, but the knowledge, the casual, everyday knowledge of it, is essentially gone. Number 21. Kerosene lamps as primary lighting. This is not about decorative oil lamps. This is about the fact that as late as 1935, nearly 1/3 of all American homes, most of them rural, were lit primarily by kerosene, not as backup lighting. As the main event, the Depression slowed rural electrification dramatically. Families who might have gotten electricity in the early 1930s had to wait until the late 1930s or even the 1940s as utilities cut expansion and the Rural Electrification Act of 1936 began its slow rollout. Kerosene lamp maintenance was a genuine skill set. Trimming the wick correctly, cleaning the chimney without breaking it, managing fuel consumption so you didn't run out before payday. A well-kept kerosene lamp gave surprisingly good reading light. A badly kept one smoked and smelled. The products that supported this ecosystem, specialty lamp oil, wick by the yard, chimney glass sold in hardware bins, have almost entirely vanished, replaced by the assumption that electricity is simply always available. Which, as anyone who lived through a major storm in recent years can attest, is an assumption worth questioning. Number 20. Saddle soap. Leather was everywhere in Depression-era American life, not as a luxury material, but as a working material. Shoes, harnesses, belts, straps, work gloves, saddlebags, and briefcases were all made of leather because leather, properly cared for, lasted decades. Saddle soap was the product that made that care possible. It was a mild soap combined with lanolin or neat's foot oil, formulated to clean leather without drying it out, and to condition it at the same time. A tin of saddle soap the size of a hockey puck cost 15 cents and lasted a year. Families used it on everything from work boots to school satchels to the leather seats of the family's best chairs. The decline of saddle soap as an everyday product tracks precisely with the rise of synthetic materials and the shift toward disposable goods. When shoes became things you replaced rather than things you maintained, saddle soap became a product for horse owners and antique furniture restorers, which is roughly what it is today. Number 19. Ash hoppers. If you heated your home with wood or coal in the 1930s, you produced ash, a great deal of ash. The ash hopper was a simple wooden or metal container with a draining mechanism at the bottom, and it was how Depression-era families made their own lye. You layered wood ash in the hopper, poured water through it, and collected the dark liquid that drained out. That liquid was lye, And lye was the basis of homemade soap, which was in turn how many families washed their clothes, their dishes, and themselves without spending money at the store. The ash hopper is so completely removed from modern life that most people under 60 don't know the word. It represents not just a lost product, but an entire lost chain of domestic self-sufficiency. Ash became lye, lye became soap became clean, and the whole process cost nothing but time and effort. Number 18. Mending eggs. A mending egg was a smooth egg-shaped piece of wood, usually about 3 inches long, used to darn socks. You slipped it inside the sock, positioned the hole over the rounded end, and used it as a smooth surface against which to weave new thread back and forth until the hole was filled. Every Depression-era household had one, often several. Darning socks was not optional. Wool socks cost money. Holes in socks were not a reason to throw them away. They were a reason to sit down and fix them. If you haven't already subscribed, now is a great time. The things we're covering here get more fascinating as we go, and number 10 involves a product that was in almost every American bathroom in 1935 that virtually no one has heard of today. The mending egg disappeared because socks became cheap. When you can buy a 3-pack of athletic socks for $2, there is no economic logic to spending 30 minutes darning a hole. The logic is sound, but something was lost in the transaction. People who darned their own socks reported consistently a satisfaction in the repair that had nothing to do with economics. The object was theirs. They had made it whole again. That feeling is harder to buy than socks. Number 17. Tin ceiling tile tools. This one is more specialized but worth including because of how widespread tin ceilings actually were in Depression-era commercial and domestic spaces. Tin ceiling tiles, stamped with elaborate patterns and painted white, were the affordable alternative to carved plaster in stores, diners, barbershops, and modest homes throughout the first half of the 20th century. The tools used to cut, bend, and install them, specialized tin snips with specific blade geometries, corner-folding jigs, and seaming rollers, were common in the inventory of any general handyman of the period. Today, tin ceiling tiles have had a small decorative revival, but the hand tools used to work with them professionally have been largely replaced by power shears or simply abandoned, as professional installers have become scarce. Number 16. Glass rolling pins. Depression-era kitchens often featured rolling pins that were hollow, made of glass, sealed at one end with a cork or wooden stopper, and designed to be filled with cold water or ice before use. The cold glass chilled pie dough and pastry as it was rolled, preventing the butter from melting and producing a flakier result. It was a practical solution to the problem of kitchen heat, and it worked extremely well. The glass rolling pin was also easier to clean than wooden ones, which could absorb odors and bacteria in their grain. They were sold in hardware stores and 5 and dimes for about a quarter. They broke if you dropped them, which is probably the main reason they disappeared. That, and the fact that marble and metal rolling pins, which perform a similar chilling function, eventually took over the niche. Number 15. Milk bottle caps. This is not about the glass milk bottle itself, which people remember, but about the small paper caps that sealed those bottles, and more specifically about the folk use those caps were put to during the Depression. Because milk bottle caps were made of thick, waxed cardboard with a small tab for pulling, they were saved by virtually every household and repurposed as game pieces, markers, sewing notions, and small containers. Children used them as poker chips and game counters. Women punched holes in them and strung them as decorations. Teachers used them as classroom currency. The Depression turned every manufactured object into raw material for at least 3 other uses. And the milk bottle cap is a perfect small example of that whole philosophy. Number 14. Camphor blocks. Before mothballs became the standard, before cedar balls and lavender sachets became the boutique alternative, camphor was the Depression-era standard for protecting stored wool. Camphor blocks were solid pieces of compressed camphor, a white crystalline substance derived from the camphor tree, and they were placed in drawers, trunks, and closets to repel moths. They worked well. They smelled intensely of themselves, an almost medicinal, sharp, woody scent that nobody who grew up with it ever forgets. Camphor blocks were also used medicinally during the Depression, rubbed on the chest for congestion, applied to minor muscle aches, and dissolved in hot water for steam inhalation. They represented a product that crossed the line between household and pharmacy. They're still produced, but have been almost entirely displaced by synthetic alternatives. Number 13. Butter molds. In much of rural America during the Depression, you did not buy butter at the store. You made it, either from your own cow or from cooperative arrangements with neighbors. And if you were going to give butter as a gift, trade it, or sell a small surplus, you pressed it into a wooden mold carved with a decorative design, usually a flower, a wheat sheaf, or a simple geometric pattern, and turned it out as a shaped block that announced both its freshness and the skill of whoever made it. Subscribe if you haven't yet. We're coming up on some of the most fascinating items on this list, including a product at number 8 that was sold in virtually every American pharmacy in 1932, and that most people today have never heard of. Butter molds were functional and beautiful in exactly the way that Depression-era objects often were, because decoration cost nothing when it was built into the tool, and because beauty, even in hard times, was not considered frivolous. It was considered human. The butter mold industry collapsed entirely when commercial butter and refrigeration made home butter making economically pointless. But the molds that survive fetch serious prices in antique markets because people recognize, instinctively, the dignity built into them. Number 12. Flypaper ribbons. Sticky, amber-colored strips of paper that unrolled from a cardboard cylinder and hung from the kitchen ceiling, catching flies by adhesion. They were universal. Every Depression-era kitchen had at least one. They worked, they cost almost nothing, and they required no electricity, no batteries, and no maintenance. You hung them up when the flies were bad and replaced them when they were full. The product still exists in some hardware stores and farm supply outlets, but it has been replaced in most homes by sprays, electronic zappers, and sealed windows. The flypaper ribbon represented a philosophy of pest control that was purely passive and purely mechanical. You didn't chase the flies. You waited. You let physics do the work. There is something almost meditative about that approach that the modern world has entirely abandoned. Number 11. Shaving mugs with soap cakes. The Depression-era man did not use aerosol shaving cream. He used a ceramic mug, about the size of a large coffee cup, fitted with a cake of shaving soap and a badger hair or boar hair brush. He wet the brush, worked it in circles against the soap until he had a dense lather, then applied that lather to his face with the same circular motion. The shaving mug and soap cake setup cost less to use per shave than any other method, lasted far longer than any canister of pressurized cream, and produced a superior lather by almost any measure. Barbers knew this. Men who shaved themselves knew this. The system has had a revival in recent years among enthusiasts, but it was standard American practice for the first half of the 20th century and common well into the Depression decade. It disappeared because aerosol cans were marketed as modern and convenient, and in post-war America, modern and convenient were powerful words. Number 10. Witch hazel as a daily tonic. Here is the pharmacy product most people under 50 have never used as a primary skincare staple. Witch hazel, a clear liquid distilled from the bark and leaves of the Hamamelis virginiana shrub, was the Depression-era answer to a toning lotion, aftershave, bruise treatment, insect bite reliever, and general-purpose skin product. A large bottle cost 15 cents. Families used it for everything. After washing your face, you applied witch hazel. After shaving, you applied witch hazel. After a day in the sun, after an insect bite, after a minor scrape. It was the Swiss Army knife of the Depression medicine cabinet. It's still sold today, in the same amber bottles, in virtually every pharmacy in America, which makes it one of the genuine survivors. But it has been almost entirely displaced in common use by a vast array of specialized products, each of which performs one function that witch hazel performs adequately at a fraction of the cost. Number 9. The icebox and its culture. People know about iceboxes, but they don't know about the icebox culture, the specific set of habits, products, and relationships that keeping an icebox required. The ice card, placed in the window facing outward to tell the ice delivery man how many pounds you needed that day. 25, 50, 75, or 100. The ice pick, standard kitchen equipment, used to chip pieces from the block when you needed them small. The drip pan beneath the box, emptied every morning without fail, or you'd have a puddle on your kitchen floor. The wooden ice tongs, used to carry a block from the delivery cart to the kitchen. All of these objects, the card, the pick, the pan, the tongs, existed as a complete ecosystem supporting one appliance. When electric refrigerators made the icebox obsolete, all of them disappeared overnight, as completely as if they'd never existed. Number 8. Celluloid collar savers. The Depression-era man wore a shirt collar that could be detached from the shirt body. This was not a fashion choice. It was an economic strategy. The collar of a shirt wore out and became dirty faster than the body. If you could remove it and replace it separately, you could extend the life of the shirt dramatically. Celluloid, an early plastic material, was used to make stiffened collar stays that could be wiped clean instead of washed, protecting the fabric beneath and extending the interval between washings. An entire small industry existed around collar accessories, collar buttons, collar stays, collar boxes, collar stretchers, and the tools to maintain them. The industry vanished as shirt construction methods changed and the detachable collar fell out of fashion, a transition that happened gradually through the 1940s and 1950s. Number 7. Pomade tins. Before the era of hair gel, before spray, before mousse, before the dozens of products that now occupy the hair care aisle, there was pomade. A waxy or oily compound sold in small flat tins. Pomade was used by Depression-era men and women to control hair, add shine, and maintain style throughout the day. The tins were small enough to fit in a shirt pocket. They were refillable in some cases. The brands of that era, Brylcreem, Murray's, Dixie Peach, Sweet Georgia Brown, were household names. A great number of people hearing this list right now may want to leave a comment about which pomade brand they remember from childhood or from their grandparents' bathroom shelf. We'd love to hear it. Pomade has had a resurgence in recent years among barber culture enthusiasts, but the culture of the Depression-era pomade tin, the small personal object that men carried as a matter of daily grooming habit, is largely gone. Number 6. Lard tins. Rendered pig fat was the cooking fat of the Depression. Not butter, which was expensive and used carefully. Not vegetable oil, which was a 20th century product still establishing itself. Not olive oil, which was imported and costly. Lard. Bought in large tins, sometimes rendered at home from fat purchased from the butcher, stored on a cool shelf or in the icebox. Lard made pie crusts. It fried chicken. It seasoned cast iron. It was rubbed on leather in a pinch. The tin it came in, once empty, became a storage container. Lard was not a shameful or primitive ingredient. It was the backbone of American cooking for 2 centuries, and the Depression generation used it without apology. The collapse of lard as a mainstream cooking fat came in the late 1950s and 1960s as vegetable shortening, and then cooking oils were marketed as healthier alternatives. The science on that turns out to have been considerably more complicated than the marketing suggested. Number 5. Rag rug looms. In Depression-era homes, nothing was wasted, and fabric scraps were among the most carefully saved materials. Worn-out clothing, curtains past their usefulness, blankets beyond repair were all cut into strips and woven on simple wooden looms into rag rugs. The looms themselves were often homemade, built to a standard design that had been in use since colonial times. Simple rectangular frames strung with cotton warp thread through which the rag strips were woven back and forth. The result was a thick, colorful, durable floor covering that cost nothing but time. Families could identify the materials in their rugs. That blue stripe was from Father's work shirt. That green section was from the curtains in the bedroom before the pattern faded. The rug was a textile record of the household's history. Rag rug looms are still manufactured today, in small quantities, for craft enthusiasts. But the practice of making them as a matter of household necessity, of turning worn-out clothing into floor covering because the alternative was a cold, bare floor, belongs entirely to a world that no longer exists. Number 4. Glass milk. Glass medicine bottles. Milk glass, an opaque white glass, was the standard material for medicine bottles and toiletry containers throughout the Depression era. It was used for cold cream jars, powder boxes, salve containers, and a host of medicinal products that no longer exist in the forms they once took. The glass itself was beautiful in an understated way, smooth and white as bone china. It didn't react with its contents. It could be sterilized. It could be reused after washing. A milk glass cold cream jar from 1932 is, structurally speaking, as functional today as it was then. Families saved them by the dozen. They held pins, they held buttons, they held spare coins, they held seeds pulled from the garden for next year's planting. The shift away from milk glass toward clear glass and then plastic containers is a story of cost reduction and material science that had nothing to do with whether milk glass was a better container. It was, by most measures, superior. It just became more expensive to produce than the alternatives. Number 3. Wick trimmers. The Depression-era kerosene lamp required a tool that most people today have never seen and cannot name. A wick trimmer was a small scissor-like instrument with one concave blade, designed to trim the charred top of a lamp wick cleanly and at the correct angle without crushing the wick's fibers or dropping ash into the oil reservoir. A badly trimmed wick produced a flickering, smoking flame. A cleanly trimmed wick burned steadily and brightly with minimal soot. The wick trimmer was a precision tool for a common task, and it represents the category of product we might call the competence tool, an object that exists to help you do a basic thing well rather than adequately. They are still made today, for candle enthusiasts and antique lamp collectors, and they work exactly as well as they always did. But they serve a population measured in thousands rather than millions. Number 2. The washboard. Not as a curiosity, not as a prop in a folk museum. As the primary laundry implement of between a third and a half of all American households, as recently as 1940. The washboard, a rectangular frame of wood holding a corrugated surface of zinc, glass, or galvanized steel, against which wet, soaped clothing was scrubbed by hand, was the center of Monday's work in tens of millions of American homes. Women who used them recall the physical reality with total clarity: the cold water in the tub on winter mornings, the knuckles scraped against the corrugations, the specific wrist motion that saved your skin better than the straightforward approach, the weight of wet wool in your arms as you wrung it out by hand. The washboard demanded physical literacy, a specific bodily knowledge that has been entirely lost in a single generation. It's sold today as a musical instrument, which tells you everything. And now, number 1, the one that contains all the others, the one that, once you understand it, changes how you look at everything your grandparents and great-grandparents kept and used and maintained. Number 1, the home medicine chest and its contents. Not a product exactly, but a system, an institution, a practice so embedded in Depression-era domestic life that its disappearance has had consequences we are still working out. The Depression-era home medicine chest contained at minimum the following: a small tin of camphor salve, a roll of linen adhesive bandaging, a bottle of iodine, a bottle of witch hazel, a tin of zinc oxide paste, a roll of absorbent cotton, a small pair of bandage scissors, a thermometer, a bottle of aspirin, and a tin of mustard powder for poultices. Every one of these items could be obtained for a combined cost of under $1.50 in 1933 money. Every one of them could be used by any literate adult without professional instruction. The family that maintained this medicine chest was not practicing medicine. They were practicing competence. The contents were not just products. They were a curriculum. A child who grew up in a household with a proper Depression-era medicine chest grew up knowing what iodine did and why it stung, knowing what a poultice was and when to apply one, knowing that the thermometer read in Fahrenheit and that 98.6 was normal and 104 was serious, knowing that the cotton was for cleaning, the zinc oxide was for protecting, and the camphor was for penetrating ache. This knowledge was not exotic. It was not medical school material. It was the baseline competence that adults were expected to possess when it came to the bodies of themselves and their children. Most of these individual products still exist. Iodine is still on pharmacy shelves. Zinc oxide is still sold. Witch hazel is still available in the same amber bottles. But the system that united them, the deliberate, comprehensive, Self-sufficient medicine chest maintained with intention and knowledge has been almost entirely replaced by the assumption that a professional or a pharmacy will handle whatever comes up. The Depression generation couldn't afford that assumption. They couldn't afford to not know. And in not being able to afford ignorance, they accumulated a kind of practical wisdom that we have traded away for convenience, and are only now beginning to understand the price of that trade. Here's the challenge. Of the 25 products on this list, how many were in your grandparents' home? Leave the number in the comments. If you can name the specific brand of pomade from your grandfather's bathroom shelf or the exact smell of the camphor blocks in your grandmother's cedar chest, leave that too. Because that kind of memory is not trivial. It's not nostalgia for nostalgia's sake. It is a thread connecting you to people who solved real problems with real elegance under real pressure. And every thread we can keep from breaking is worth keeping. The Depression generation did not think of themselves as remarkable. They thought of themselves as people doing what had to be done with what they had. That, perhaps, is the most remarkable thing about them.